Welcome back to another episode of Psychiatry Rewritten. My name is Lane. And you know what no one talks about? What happens when an elderly person starts to forget things, wander at night, or lash out from confusion, and instead of being met with care, they get locked in a psych ward, injected with antipsychotics, and labeled with a mental illness they never had. Today, we're talking about the misdiagnosis of dementia, the abuse of involuntary holds, and the systems that profit off silencing people who are scared, not psychotic. They didn't lose their mind. They lost their map. But instead of trying to help them find it, we locked the door and told them they were dangerous. Dementia is not a mood disorder. It's not a personality issue. And it's not psychosis. But that's exactly how it gets treated. Especially in emergency rooms, psychiatric units, and long-term care facilities where staff are overworked, undertrained, and more focused on liability than humanity. Let's get something straight. Someone who forgets where they are and lashes out in fear, someone who starts sundowning at 6 p.m. and mistakes the nurse for their daughter, someone who yells, cries, or wanders the hall looking for home, that is not a psychiatric emergency. That is a brain in distress, not a mind unraveling. But the system doesn't see it that way. Instead of just slowing down and asking, when did this start? Do they usually act like this at night? Have they been screened for dementia? They get labeled as agitated, paranoid, or gravely disabled. And once that label sticks, it's hard to peel off, even if it was never accurate to begin with. So what happens next? A confused, frightened person, usually in their 70s or 80s, ends up in a locked psych ward. Sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. And they're treated for a diagnosis they never actually had. Not because they were unstable, but because no one took the time to understand what was really going on. You know what's worse than being confused? Being confused and locked up for it. Being disoriented, scared, and treated like a danger instead of someone who needs help. Here's how it happens. Someone calls 911. Maybe it's a caregiver. Maybe it's a nurse who panics when a patient starts screaming or trying to leave the facility. Maybe it's a family member who doesn't know what else to do. But the person ends up in the ER, alone, confused, and maybe still in pajamas. And the notes say things like agitated, combative, disoriented, paranoid, gravely disabled. And just like that, they're put on a psychiatric hold in a locked behavioral unit, surrounded by strangers, no clocks, no windows, no sense of time, no familiar faces, no routine, no grounding. And if they weren't in full delirium before, they will be now. Because here's what no one seems to talk about. Delirium is not rare. It's expected in settings like this. If you take someone with dementia, place them in a loud, sterile, overstimulating environment, deprive them of sleep, structure, and sunlight, and then sedate them with antipsychotics, of course their brain shuts down. Of course they start hallucinating. Of course they try to escape or scream or fight the nurse they no longer recognize. That's not non-compliant. That's survival mode, and they are scared. And yet, this is what we do to elderly patients every single day. Whether you're aware of it or not, especially those without strong advocates, money, or power. We pathologize their confusion. We punish their panic. And then we call it care.
What is a labile mood? Labile mood means rapid and unpredictable changes in emotional expression. A person may go from laughing to crying to yelling within minutes, often without a clear external trigger. It's not just moodiness. It's a neurological dysregulation, and in dementia, this isn't manipulation or drama. It's the brain losing its filter, timing, and ability to self-regulate. Why does labile mood happen in dementia? Well, one, frontal lobe dysfunction. So the frontal lobe is responsible for impulse control, right? Judgment, mood regulation, and social appropriateness. In many types of dementia, especially frontotemporal dementia, this region begins to deteriorate. The result? Emotions come out raw and unfiltered. No pause, no subtlety, just reactive discharge, rapid fire. Number 2, neurotransmitter imbalance. So dementia disrupts the production and regulation of key brain chemicals. such as serotonin, for example. Serotonin affects mood, sleep, and impulse control. Dopamine. It's involved in emotional reward, attention, and drive. And then you have acetylcholine, which is critical for things like memory and attention, especially in Alzheimer's. So, when these systems are dysregulated, mood swings and agitation can follow. Not because the person wants to react this way, but because the system that balances emotion is damaged. 3, sundowning and circadian rhythm disruption. So people with dementia often experience sundowning, where confusion and agitation worsen in the late afternoon or evening. This is tied to disrupted melatonin cycles, poor sleep architecture, decreased environmental cues, light, routine, etc. So mood becomes more labile during these periods due to increased disorientation, fatigue, and sensory overload. And coincidentally, this is just kind of a side note, this is around the time for shift change, 7 p.m. in nursing homes and things like that, right? So, number 4, cognitive fatigue and overstimulation. When the brain is already struggling to process the world, too much noise, light, or activity can overload the system. What looks like mood swings may actually be the result of sensory and cognitive flooding, where the emotional brain kicks in because the thinking brain is exhausted. Number 5, unmet needs and communication breakdown. If someone can't express pain, fear, hunger, or loneliness, they may become irritable or emotional. Not out of mood instability, but frustration and fear. The mood lability is sometimes the only way they can communicate distress. Mood fluctuations in dementia isn't about attitude. It's about a brain that can't sort, store, or filter emotion the way it used to. It's a perfect storm. Sundowning, sedation, sensory deprivation, and no one to explain what's happening. That's not just disorientation. That's trauma. I didn't come here for this. I came for an infection on my leg. I knew it looked bad. I've been living out of my car, and it's hard to keep things clean. But I wasn't trying to die. I was trying to take care of myself. Yeah, I've always been a little different. I talk to myself sometimes. I have strong beliefs. I live with my dog and I like my freedom. But that doesn't make me crazy. It makes me me. They gave me antibiotics. I started feeling better. But they wouldn't let me leave. They said I wasn't safe. They said I wasn't oriented to reality. They basically said I didn't have insight. But I knew exactly where I was. I just didn't agree with the way they saw me. Next thing I know, I'm on a locked unit, right? They filed for guardianship. Told me I needed help. But the only thing I needed was to be left alone. I kept saying, I don't want to stay here. I live in my car. I'm not asking for a house. I just want to go back to my life. They looked at me like I was a problem. But I wasn't sick enough to be saved, just strange enough to be controlled. Let's not pretend this is just a medical error. This is a system failure. And for some of these patients, it's a death sentence. Because what starts as a 72-hour hold or whatever their state law is, often turns into weeks of locked care, missed medications, inappropriate labeling. And by the time someone figures out what's really going on, it's too late. They've lost their baseline, their job, their housing, sometimes their legal rights to even make decisions for themselves even anymore. All because they were confused in the wrong place at the wrong time. We just gave them something to calm down. That sentence should chill you. Because sometimes it's the last thing they're given before they die. Let's talk about chemical restraint. Because in geriatric psychiatric units, it happens all the time. Sometimes it's Haldol. Sometimes Seroquel, Risperdal, Zyprexa, a little something in a syringe. Oral meds crushed into applesauce. Sometimes even emergency injections against their will. And it's legal. Even though these medications carry black box warnings when used in patients with dementia. Even though studies show a significantly increased risk of stroke, cardiac arrest, and death. Even though these patients often don't have true psychosis, just confusion that no one took the time to understand or wanted to deal with. They weren't calming them down. They were sedating them into silence. But it's not just the meds. It's the environment too. And here's where it gets even more dangerous. Many geriatric psych units aren't medically equipped. They don't have code cards. They don't have crash carts. They don't have IV access supplies. The nurses aren't trained in ICU or even acute medical care. They're trained in behavioral stabilization. And you know what happens when a patient goes into cardiac arrest? They have to wait for outside staff to respond to a code in a unit where the door is locked, where medical equipment is restricted, where everything is delayed. And sometimes they die right there on the floor with no family in a unit that wasn't built to save them, only to contain them. And the worst part, a lot of these patients aren't even elderly by most standards. Some are in their 50s. That's considered geriatric in behavioral health because the system decided it was cheaper to group anyone 55 and older together. Two of my own former clients died in units like these, like this. Not because they were beyond help, but because the system wasn't built to give them any. She didn't die from psychosis. She died from the way we treat it. So you're not wrong to be angry. You're not overreacting. This is happening in facilities across the country every single day. And it's not just negligence. It's normalized. So let me ask the providers something. The nurses, the psychiatrists, the administrators signing off on these holds. Would you let this happen to your parent? Would you lock your mother in a windowless room for 3 weeks because she got confused one night and wandered outside? Would you sedate your father with Haldol until he couldn't speak because he panicked and tried to leave? Would you accept a nurse saying, well, we just gave him a little something to help him sleep, when what they gave him was a black box antipsychotic with a known risk of sudden cardiac death? Yeah. Would you be okay knowing he died on the floor of a unit with no crash cart because it wasn't built for saving people, just for managing them? If the answer is no, then you need to take a long, hard look in the mirror. Because what you wouldn't allow for your own family, you're allowing for someone else's every single day. And if you're someone who has been lucky enough for this to not have affected you, good. But the reality is, if we don't address the things that are happening, then it will become someone you love. It will become your parent. It will become you. Because this isn't just negligence. It's a revenue stream. Behavioral health is a billion-dollar business. And vulnerable people are being exploited for profit. So let's drop the polite language. People aren't just falling through the cracks. They're being pushed because someone stands to gain when they're locked in and medicated. Welcome to the business of behavioral health. Long-term inpatient stays, medications administered, psychiatric evaluations, guardianship filings, daily billing for room and board, plus extra fees for things like occupational therapy, group therapy, and medication management, even if the patient isn't cognitively able to engage. And who pays for all of that? Medicare, Medicaid, insurance. Or if the patient has assets, they do. This is where it gets especially twisted. Many for-profit psychiatric hospitals target older adults. Some specifically seek out those who are homeless, estranged from family, or medically complex, because those are the patients who are least likely to push back, right? Least likely to have advocates or strong advocates, and most likely to be held longer. More reimbursement for longer. Think about that for a second. A person with mild dementia who gets confused at night might be worth thousands of dollars in billing per week, okay? Sedated, isolated, and unable to leave, but fully billable. And if a facility decides to file for guardianship, that person loses their legal right to refuse treatment. They can be placed in long-term locked care. Their assets can be seized or controlled. Their home can be cleared out. Their entire life signed over to the state or to the very agency profiting from their continued care. And no one questions it because it's happening behind locked doors. This is elder abuse in a lab coat. And we need to call it what it is. A system that converts vulnerability into income. This isn't care. It's containment. Monetized. And let's not pretend this is rare. This is business as usual in far too many facilities. What? And if we don't talk about it, if we don't blow it wide open, we're complicit. I knew it was wrong. She didn't need to be here. She wasn't dangerous. She was different. And that's all it took. She came in for an infection. Was living in her car, sure. But she liked it that way. She had a dog. A routine. She was lucid, polite. Really funny. The psychiatrist said she lacked insight. That she was gravely disabled. He filed for guardianship. And I stood there. White coat. Badge. Degrees on the wall. And I didn't say a word. Because it wasn't my call. He runs the unit. I just do med checks and round on the patients. If I push back, I get written up. Or worse, replaced. I've got kids. Student loans. I sign what I'm told to sign. But some nights, I think about her. How she looked at me and asked, "Can I leave?" And I didn't know how to say, "Not anymore." Sometimes I tell myself I'm helping people. Other times, I know I'm just part of the machine. This doesn't have to be the norm. These outcomes aren't inevitable. They're just the result of bad systems, lazy thinking, and fear-based decisions. Here's how to stop being part of the problem. Not every confused patient is having a psychiatric emergency. Not every odd belief needs a locked door and a sedative. Not every elder in distress is gravely disabled. But if we don't slow down, ask better questions, and challenge our own bias, we will keep treating human beings like liabilities instead of lives. So let's get specific. Okay, better questions to ask. Is this new or chronic? So could this be delirium or medical in origin? Like a UTI. What's their baseline? So have they always been like this? What time of day are the symptoms worse? Meaning, are there indicators pointing to sundowning? Because sundowning is not psychosis. Have they had a neuro workup? Because cognitive testing before labeling. And do they actually want help or just not live how you would live? Okay, so here's some receipts and stats. Antipsychotic use in dementia increases risk of death by 60 to 70%. Only 17% of patients with dementia in hospitals are properly assessed by geriatric specialists. Delirium occurs in up to 50% of hospitalized older adults and often goes undiagnosed. Psychiatric hospitals receive an average of 1,100 to 1,500 per day per patient through Medicare, Medicaid. That's from a 2023 reimbursement rate from CMS. Rates of inappropriate psychiatric hold in elderly patients rise significantly when they're uninsured, unhoused, or without family present. So, how to be less shitty providers, but we'll call it how it actually helps. How to actually help. If you wouldn't let it happen to your parent, don't let it happen to someone else's. Stop defaulting to antipsychotics for agitation without asking why they're agitated. Stop assuming someone is gravely disabled just because they live differently than you. If you're in a system that profits off silence, be loud. If you're not trained in dementia care, say so and refer. Advocate like it's your job. Because it is. Instead of reaching for Haldol every damn time, do this. Reorient, don't restrain. Use clocks, windows, routines, and names to gently ground them in time, place. Identify unmet needs. Ask, are they hungry, in pain, overstimulated, scared, needing the bathroom? Reduce triggers, especially in the evening, right? Dim the lights, lower the noise, avoid unnecessary interruptions, use soft voices and familiar routines. Use comfort-based interventions, weighted blankets, calming music, aromatherapy, hand massage. Like, we're not asking anybody to reinvent the wheel. These are all evidence-backed and zero side effects. They just take a little bit of time. Validate their reality. Instead of arguing, no, your husband isn't alive. Like, try joining gently. Tell me more about him. This is called therapeutic fibbing. And it's more humane than confrontation. Okay? Don't over-medicate for behavioral symptoms alone. Don't label patients as aggressive without context. Don't punish them for fear or confusion. And don't use chemical restraint because you feel helpless or understaffed. If the brain is inflamed, overstimulated, or dying, it will act out. You don't punish the brain for that. You support it. Some newer and helpful evidence-based approaches for dementia include 1. Cognitive stimulation therapy, also known as CST, group-based or individual activities that involve memory, problem solving, and language. And this helps improve quality of life and may slow cognitive decline. It is NICE approved in the UK, being widely adopted globally. Number 2, non-pharmacological interventions first, such as music therapy, structured routines, light therapy for sundowning, environmental adaptations such as colors, signage, layout. These have stronger support than most meds for mood, agitation, especially in dementia. Cholinesterase inhibitors and memantine. Donepezil, rivastigmine, galantamine, and memantine are used to slow progression in Alzheimer's dementia. They're not cures, but they can modestly preserve function and delay behavioral worsening. Number 4, the DICE approach. Describe, investigate, create, and evaluate. An evidence-based framework for managing behavioral symptoms in dementia. Describe the behavior. Investigate the medical causes / environment. Create a tailored plan, and then evaluate and adjust. This was developed by Kales, Gitlin, and Lyketsos. Sorry about that. Highly recommended. Number 5, lifestyle-based prevention strategies. While prevention isn't guaranteed, these are linked to reduced risk of dementia. Exercise, especially aerobic and strength, have shown to improve cognition. Cardiovascular health, such as managing your blood pressure, your cholesterol, and diabetes, super important. Mediterranean diet, omega-3s, fatty acids, fish oils, whole grains, low sugar. Lifelong learning and cognitive engagement, social connection, and also, so important, consistent quality sleep. Emerging research even shows links between untreated hearing loss and increased dementia risk. So yes, hearing aids can be neuroprotective. Some bonus emerging therapies for anybody, interested. Lecanemab is a recently FDA-approved anti-amyloid antibody for early Alzheimer's. Not for late stage and not a cure, but may slow progression slightly. Transcranial stimulation plus digital cognitive platforms are also under study. And also, a bonus little mini segment, the power of baby dolls and just dignity-based care. They don't need a pill to calm down. Sometimes they just need to feel like they matter again. In many memory care facilities and dementia units, caregivers offer baby dolls or lifelike stuffed animals to residents, and the results are often incredible. Not because they're being tricked, not because they're being treated like children, but because they're being given something to care for again. It taps into instinct, purpose, and attachment, especially for people who were once parents or caregivers. You'll see residents calm down, hold the doll gently, rock it, hum lullabies, and something in them softens. It grounds. It feels familiar again. And it works. A 2020 study published in Geriatric Nursing found that doll therapy reduced agitation and verbal aggression in patients with moderate to severe dementia. Another study, Mitchell and O'Donnell from 2013, found improved social interaction and reduced reliance on antipsychotic meds when doll therapy was implemented consistently. And most importantly, families often report seeing a glimmer of recognition, of personhood that had been missing for months. It's not about tricking them. It's about giving them back something to love when the world has taken so much away. They didn't need to be medicated. They didn't need to be locked up. They didn't need to have their lives taken away by a system pretending to help. They needed time, grounding, safety, and someone, anyone, who cared enough to ask the right questions. If you made it through this episode, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here. And we'll see you next time.